This is the MiG-23ML, and this is also the MiG-23ML, and so is that. Of course, one is the MLA, one is the MLD, and then in the center we have the 23ML itself. These three jets, they're basically identical, although there are some subtle differences. Primarily, the MiG-23ML will set you back $70 US. And of course, that begs the question, is it worth $70 US? Well, it's complicated. And honestly, I think the only real way to answer that question is by first taking an in-depth look at what the MiG-23ML is. However, before I go on to do that, I first want to talk to you about today's video sponsor. Unless you've been sleeping under a rock, you'll probably have heard of Raid Shadow Legends at one point or another. But, well, fifth, I hear you say, why specifically should I try out Raid today? Well, at the moment, Raid Shadow Legends is hosting a huge event to celebrate the arrival of spring in Terraria. And during this event, players can win some real-life items for the first time ever. By participating in the Spring Hunt minigame, you may potentially win something like a game console or one of $10,000 US worth of Amazon gift cards. And besides these rewards, all players can receive a free legendary champion through Raid's first ever 14-day login program. By simply logging in for 7 days, you'll be able to get your hands on the Chronicler Adeline, who's bound to be a perfect companion to have on your team. So if you've been looking for an RPG game that you can play both on your phone as well as on your PC, then maybe it is finally time to give Raid a try. With over 700 unique and customizable champions which you can use in both challenging PvE engagements as well as intense PvP battles, Raid offers tons of depth and strategy to keep you entertained for hours. So download Raid Shadow Legends for free today, and be sure to do so via either this QR code or by clicking the first link in the description. Only that way will first-time players receive some extra in-game loot to help you get started, as well as 2 additional super strong epic heroes. Oh, and 2 more things. Once you've installed the game, be sure to use code SPRINGHUNT24 to receive some extra in-game bonuses and join my clan so that we can be legends together. Like I already mentioned, you're gonna need to spend $70 US to get your hands on the MiG-23ML, and that's of course because it is a rank 7 premium that sits in the Soviet tech tree with a battle rating of 11.3. And for that battle rating, this is an incredibly good jet, not just on paper, but also in practice. One of the main things that makes the MiG-23 airframe unique is the fact that it has those funny beep boop wiggle wings, which allow this plane to not only be extremely fast in a straight line, but if you push the wings all the way forwards, it is also incredibly maneuverable at slower speeds. So much so that this jet can basically dominate any other aircraft you throw at it at 11.3 or below. Although in fairness, that's not true just because of this plane's airframe. Another major contributing factor to the MiG-23ML being an absolute monster is its hilariously powerful engine. The thrust-to-weight ratio of this jet is equal to Lamau, and as a result, not only can this plane accelerate extremely quickly from basically any given speed, but it's also an incredibly strong raid fighter. Because this jet has a thrust output of yes, it basically can never fully run out of energy. So while other jets will start falling out of the sky at one point or another if they're continuously turning in a circle, the MiG-23ML doesn't suffer from that issue at all. In other words, not only does this jet have incredibly competitive flight performance, but it's also deceptively easy to use. Worst case scenario, you either try to accelerate away from your opponent, and if that doesn't work, you just keep holding S until the enemy aircraft completely runs out of energy. To make a long story short, this plane is incredibly powerful when it comes to dogfights. But of course, being a good dogfighter isn't necessarily synonymous with being a good 11.3 jet, and that's because at this battle rating, there is a lot more to being a good plane than just flight performance alone. In terms of countermeasures, the MiG-23ML is fairly unremarkable. It has plenty to get you through an average ARB game, but it also doesn't have an insane amount like you would find on something like the Mirage F1C200. Just make sure that when you're creating custom loadouts for this jet, you don't equip the fuel tank, and instead you equip the countermeasure pod that goes on the bottom of the plane. And actually, speaking of loadouts, the missiles is where this jet truly starts to get weird. The relevant weapon loadouts for this jet are as follows. You want to carry 4 R60Ms paired with either the R24R or the R24T. At 11.3, the R60M isn't the best missile available, at least not in my opinion. Whilst it might still be an all-aspect IR missile with 30 Gs of overload, it does also have relatively limited range, and most importantly, it is extremely flare hungry. Really, the only reliable way to get kills with these is by simply trying to shoot at enemies who who you think aren't paying attention to you. And whilst this is technically true for every kill you try to get at top tier, I think it is especially true of the R60Ms. The R24, well, that's an entirely different story. This Soviet telephone pole comes in two different variants. You have the R24R and the R24T. These two missiles are identical except for one key difference. The T is IR guided, whilst the R is a semi-active radar homing missile. And out of these two, I personally never bother carrying the IR version. And that's not because it's a bad missile, but rather because the R24R is just too funny to not use. Of course, any radar missile is only as good as the radar set that it's paired with, which may seem like a bad thing in the case of the MiG-23ML, because on paper this jet's radar isn't all that great. And whilst that is kinda true, there is one thing to keep in mind. The MiG-23ML's radar is a J-band radar, which is a type of frequency that a lot of other aircraft that you'll run into aren't able to detect. In other words, when you launch this missile at one of those aircraft, they won't get an RWR warning about you doing so. And even if they're successfully using their eyeball Mark 1s to spot your missile, by that time it's already gonna be too late, because the R24R is incredibly resistant to chaff. As you can see here, whilst the radar may start locking onto the enemy chaff, the missile itself is gonna keep heading for the enemy jet as long as you keep the nose of your plane pointed roughly at your opponent. So in short, whilst the R24R may not be the most impressive missile in terms of its kinematics, it is an extremely deadly weapon due to the fact that it's very easy to catch people off guard. But what's interesting is that this kinda also works the other way around for the MiG-23ML. The RWR on this jet is best described as, so whilst you can catch other people off guard with a radar missile that they won't see coming, you can also be caught off guard by people firing radar missiles at you, of which you are not notified by your RWR. As a result, if you really want to be safe whilst playing this jet, you have to stick very close to the deck. Granted, that's something you should be doing in this BR bracket anyway, but for the MiG-23ML it is particularly true due to its absolutely atrocious RWR. Anyway, that's enough yapping about what this plane is/isn't. I now want to circle back to that initial question of whether or not this plane is worth its $70 price tag. The short answer is simply yes, because the MiG-23ML is not only one of the best Rank 7 premiums available, but it's also one of the best 11.3 jets, period. And when you keep in mind that out of all the tech trees in the game, the Soviet tech tree is one of the best ones to focus on, I think that it's a no-brainer to invest your money and time into this aircraft. However, I do want to add that buying this plane doesn't make much sense if you already own something like the MiG-23MLD. In that case, just buy a talisman for the MiG-23MLD instead. Not only will you end up saving money that way, but you'll also get your hands on a better jet. Not only does the MLD fix the MML's RWR issue, but it also gets leading edge slats which make the plane even more maneuverable. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. Remember to check out Raid Shadow Legends by clicking the first link in the description, and if you enjoyed this video, then maybe consider watching the one that's currently being shown to you on screen. It's kind of the same thing, a little bit different, but I think you'll enjoy that video as well.